Hello guys, it's the Eastern Mass Rail Fanners back with another video. We have part 2 in the series of talking about random railroads today. Since obviously you guys like the last one, we will do it again for you. And this time we will be doing the Boston and Maine Railroad. I hope you enjoy. Alright, so for those of you that don't know what the Boston Maine is, it was the former operator of all lines out of North Station. It got absorbed into Guilford Transportation in 1983. If you don't know what Guilford is, we'll explain them later in the video. So we will be starting out a little bit before the Boston and Maine was created. At this time, there were 4 major railroads in the North Boston area: the Fitchburg Railroad, the Boston and Lowell Railroad, the Andover and Haverhill Railroad, and the Eastern Railroad. Now, all of these railroads were in a bitter rivalry, but we will be focusing on the Andover and Haverhill Railroad. Now, the Andover and Haverhill was looking to build a line north to Portsmouth to connect with the Portland, Saco, and Portsmouth Railroad. However, to do that, they had to charter 2 new companies, and those companies were the Boston and Maine and the Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts Railroad. Now, eventually, all of this got merged into the Boston and Maine Railroad. The next 25 years after that were a mess of expansions and railroads getting bought out that I will not go into, but there are some places I'm sure where you can find information on that period. However, it eventually came down to just 2 railroads: Boston and Maine and the Eastern Railroad. And eventually, after a long, hard battle, the Boston and Maine ended up being I don't know if it's the sole operator, but they had the vast majority of Boston operations. Alright, so now that the Boston Maine is the sole operator of railroads in the northern region of New England, they were just kind of living the good life. Just steam trains galore everywhere. It was all nice. Alright, so now we're going to talk about a part of Boston and Maine known as Mogul Country. Now, Mogul Country is a section of the Boston, Maine, in New Hampshire from the Connecticut River main line to the Claremont line from Concord, New Hampshire to Claremont Junction, New Hampshire, and all of the lines in there, such as any lines through locations such as Keene, New Hampshire, Hillsborough, New Hampshire, all of that stuff. So, Mogul Country is one of the most quaint, rural, small town vibe parts of the Boston and Maine network, and personally, it is my favorite part of the Boston and Maine network just because of all the quaint little photos that I pulled up some of them on screen. So I'm just going to give you a second to enjoy the natural beauty of some of it. Ah, the downfall of the Boston and Maine Railroad. My favorite part. Well, it all started in the 1950s with something called cars and highways and air transport. This was the absolute worst thing that could have ever happened for the Boston Maine. Up until that point, they had virtually zero competitors in the transport market. Now, all railroads across the United States were suffering at a lack of business because many companies were switching to air and road transport, same as the passengers. So all of these rail companies that used to be powerhouses were now losing millions upon millions of dollars. This is how one of the previous railroad that I talked about, Penn Central, was created to be able to save money. Luckily, that didn't happen with the Boston, Maine. However, much of their system was cut, destroyed, ripped up. Now, the worst part about that is that all of these small towns that I love to talk about, love to see photos of, and just love to learn about, had zero real connection anymore. And that hampered many small towns that were built around the railroad. So many people moved away from these towns, and ghost towns were created. Some towns stayed afloat, such as the town of Marlborough. There used to be a small branch out to the town of Marlborough, but it disappeared. You know why? Because cost cutting, and some of the presidents of the Boston, Maine weren't exactly the best leaders. So, boom, no more rail transport. However, Marlborough is still a well off town, mostly because it's in the Boston area. I mean, come on. You can't be not very successful if you live within like 30 miles of Boston. So, understandable. But many other small towns didn't fare the same. The bad thing about this is many people lost their homes, their jobs, and their memories. Well, it's not all bad though. The Boston Maine still has traffic on deteriorating track with old locomotives that they need to replace. So they do. They buy new locomotives such as the GP18s, the GP7s, and later on the GP 38-2s. However, in the 1980s, the Boston and Maine was eventually absorbed into Guilford. And we all know how the story goes from there. No more Boston and Maine. Well, you've reached the end of this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the rails. Bye. Bye.